Welcome to episode 89 of the Headspace and Timing Podcast. Happy New Year. Welcome to the first show of 2019 and the first show where we're operating as a standalone show. Today's guest is the founder of the Change Your POV Podcast Network, Eddie Lazzari, and we talk about why they brought a mental health professional onto the network to address the stigma against seeking mental health support.
You know, guys are talking about their experiences. They may not realize that what they're doing is touching different mental health concepts, but they're talking about it nonetheless, right? And that's one of the things that I found and continue to find, I guess, most beneficial is talking to guys that I don't necessarily have to serve with them, but guys that have served, that I can be able to have a conversation about my time in the military and my time, on deployment, and feel like it's a safe place to talk and it's okay to discuss certain things, because there are things that happened or that has happened or does happen in wartime that to anyone that was never there or has never experienced it would look at it and be like, that's wrong. That's really messed up. Like, how could you do that? Or how could you be a part of that, or, be privy to that? Or how could you be okay with that? And it's like, it's those conversations that you have that you're able to open up and not be judged by things that have happened in your deployment or in your experience.
Welcome to the Headspace and Timing Podcast, a show dedicated to breaking down the stereotypes around veteran mental health. My name is Dwayne France, and I'm a retired Army non-commissioned officer and a combat veteran of both Iraq and Afghanistan. After retiring from the Army, I took on a new mission as a clinical mental health counselor for my fellow service members. If you served in any branch of the military, then you're familiar with the M2 machine gun, the 50 cal. It's one of the most effective weapons in the military's arsenal. If the weapon's headspace and timing wasn't set correctly, however, it was just a useless chunk of metal. Veterans can be rendered inoperable if their headspace and timing's not set correctly either. That's my goal with this show, to change the way that we think and talk about veteran mental health and reduce the stigma against seeking support. Each week, we'll talk with mental health professionals, veterans, and those who support service members, veterans, and their families. We're going to have real and honest conversations about a topic that most just don't like to talk about, veteran mental health. Let's jump into this week's conversation. So yeah, this is happening.
It is.
Yeah, it's a little nervous, or I'm a little nervous. It's a little.
Why is it?
Well, it's a failure to launch kind of thing, right? I'm like I said the other day, I'm moving out of Dad's basement. I'm in a place of my own, and
you're gonna do great, man. It's you're gonna have a lot of continued success with it. I promise you that. You've had a lot of success so far, and I think you're getting a lot of, not exposure is the wrong word, but you're getting a lot of we're breaking the stigma is what it's about, right? It's about awareness. It's about getting people to talk and to share experiences. It's funny because I just I was trying to watch that movie, Thank You for Your Service, right? And so I got on my Amazon Prime thinking I might be able to watch it for free. And I got on there, and I can't watch it for free. It's not available to rent yet. You can only buy it. And I'm like, well, I'm not going to buy it for $17 or whatever it was. I'm just going to wait till it comes out for rent. But there was another thing right next to it. It was also Thank You for Your Service. It was available on Amazon Prime. I'm like, okay, I don't know what that's all about. So I decided to watch it, and it was that documentary. Have you seen it?
No. Is it?
My God!
Based on the book too, or no?
No, it's not. It's very similar. It's called Thank You for Your Service, starring Mark Russell. Documentary. Let me see who it was written by, or who it was produced by. Director is Tom Donahue, and there was interviews on there from Robert Gates, Mike Mullen, Mark Russell, really interesting documentary. Highly recommend you check it out. Right up your alley, man. Yeah, it's an incredible documentary. It talks about everything that you're talking about. It's about the lack of mental health structure and services within the VA. And it actually went through, and some things I didn't know about is they actually had some reintegration camps and things, post World War II, and had some great success with it. But shortly after, those programs were piloted or were sunsetted, and were never kind of captured or kept over. And it just seems like every time we go into a war, or every time we're in post-war, we got to rediscover programs and rediscover mental health and rediscover the things that afflict the returning warriors, right?
That's something that's interesting, because I remember when our brigade was come back from Afghanistan, this would have been 9/10, there was actually some conversation about the brigade going to Germany for 2 weeks. So leaving Afghanistan, going to Germany to Berchtesgaden, beautiful place in Bavaria there. And there was a discussion about doing that, right? Having 2 weeks to do sort of the reintegration thing in Europe. This whole idea of, coming back on the troop ships and having time to decompress and not leaving, the battlefield and then being back on America's streets 2 days later. But a lot of the soldiers were like, forget that. I just spent a year with you yahoos, and I don't want to, I don't want to spend another 2 weeks. The families back home, of course, were up in arms. No. And of course the Army was like, forget that. We're not going to pay for it, kind of thing. And so even though it was, things like that, time to reintegrate, time to decompress, even though it would have been beneficial, it never happened because everybody was up in arms against it.
Wow. It's just amazing. Yeah. The evolution is just, what is the saying, the reason to study history is if you don't, you're doomed to repeat it. Right. And yeah, I guess there was, and if you look back into history, a lot of the earlier cultures have, I wouldn't call it, maybe it's post-war, but it's post-service, but they had ceremonies, right? Ceremonies when people would leave the service, and ceremonies when people would return from war. And it's one of the things we seem to have lost in our culture is we do a lot to ceremoniously accept someone into the ranks of our military through, boot camp, raising right hand, all of the structures of being a part of a team and a squad and a platoon, and a lot of the rituals that go on, your promotion ceremonies. You got even your, different types of ceremonies that you participate in throughout your military career. And then when it's time to get out, one of the most significant things about your military service is actually separating from it. And in most cases, there's nothing. There's here's your DD-214, there's the front gate, and have a nice day. And that's what it was for me and a lot of other guys that I talk to. And it's just seems to me like there's just something epically wrong with that.
So what was it like that last day? So you separated out of Hood?
Yeah, Hood. So it was. So I was in Iraq, and I voluntarily extended past my ETS before we got deployment orders and we got our stop loss. I knew that if we got hit with a stop loss, I was gonna get hit. So I had the option actually before I deployed to get out of the Army or voluntarily extend my ETS in order to get sucked into the stop loss. Well, I wasn't about to get out of the military. I mean, these are the guys that I trained for, the better part of 3 years. And it's like, I'm not, putting in all that effort and then not going over there with my guys. So I voluntarily extended my ETS, got sucked into the stop loss. And then, so I hit the ground in Iraq and I was already past my ETS date. And it was a few months before we were to redeploy, and I got called into the Sergeant Major's office. And my fob was the same fob as the brigade sergeant major and brigade commander, and got called into the brigade sergeant major's office, and apparently they were looking at retention and what we're going to look like post deployment, that type of thing. And he basically said that I had two choices. I either re-enlist indefinite, because anything over 10 years, right, is indef, or I had to make the decision right then and there that once I redeployed that I was separating. And so I had to make this decision in the middle of Baghdad. Called home to my wife and had that conversation. That was a very difficult conversation to have, because this was 2004, 2005. And this, everything that was going on over there was being plastered all over the news, every outlet. So it was very much unlike today where there's still conflict, but you very rarely ever hear or see or anything about it on the news. Back then, it was very much upfront and a daily thing for my wife and my family. And to try to make that decision to re-enlist indefinite, not knowing what it was going to look like in terms of redeployments and everything that we were kind of afraid of actually unfolded. And that was just back to back, just one deployment after another. All my guys that stayed in had gone through. And so I decided to get out, told the sergeant major that made the decision to separate. And felt pretty good about it, but I wasn't prepared. I didn't know what I was going to do. I didn't have any education post my high school diploma. 10 years in the Army is all I knew. And I didn't even know how to live on my own, essentially, because I moved right out of my parents' basement as a high school graduate right into the military. And, didn't know how to do that whole adulting thing all by myself. I mean, granted, I was married and had kids. I lived off post, but for the most part, the military dictated everything that I was going to do, what I was going to wear, where I was going to live, where I was going to work, and controlled a large part of, who I was. I got notified when I was supposed to go to the dentist, when I was supposed to get a checkup. I mean, everything was controlled, and I was just used to that. I didn't know how to do any of that on my own. And so anyway, redeployed in 2005 back to Fort Hood, and literally had 30 days to, sign over my equipment to whoever was going to take my place, clear CIF, clear housing, figure out transportation, figure out how I was going to live the rest of my life without the military. And so 30 days, as you can imagine,
it's a long time. No,
pretty quickly.
It's like a year, right?
Yeah. I was just handed a great big checklist, and I was told that you have until this date to make sure that everything on this checklist was signed off and initialed or stamped before I could pick up my DD-214. And so, it was everything. I had to clear medical, dental, the list. Everyone that's ever separated knows the list that you go through, right? And in between there, I had to go to, I think it was like a 3-hour TAPS class. And at the time it was I don't even know if it was called TAPS at the time. It was very new. It was a transition assistance program or whatever, there was no formal notification about what it was, how I could leverage it, what I was supposed to do with the information. So I sat through this 3-hour blur of information overload and was handed 3-ring binders and a bunch of pamphlets. A series of people would come in, do the little 20, 30-minute pitch, hand out a, like a document or two, and then the next person was up, and they were covering everything from, life insurance to this crazy thing that I don't even know what it is called a 401k to, military education, converting military experience, like all this stuff. And I was just like, so here I am just with this information dump that I had no idea what half of it meant or what I was supposed to do with any of it. And on top of it, I've got a wife and kids, and I've got to try to find a place to move to and a job that I was going to do. I had no idea what I was going to do. It was just a blur, man. And then I finally finished getting everything checked off and went to pick up my DD-214. They printed it off, and I just remember them saying, whatever you do, don't lose it, because trying to get another one is very difficult. make copies, put it somewhere safe. I'm like, okay, now what? And they're like, well, you got to give me your ID card. And I'm like, oh yeah. So I hand them my ID card and they gave me something. And they said, no, you've got to proceed to the gate, and you're not allowed back on the post without an escort. And I just remember them saying that, and I just found that very weird that I wasn't allowed back on the post without an escort. And I didn't really understand what that meant because I've been able to get on posts for 10 years and I never had to be escorted anywhere. And so I left the gate still in uniform with my DD-214 in hand. And I remember as I was driving through the front gate, main gate of Fort Hood, I just looked at the guard shack and I just saw the line of cars that were waiting to get in. And I just remember thinking to myself, if I ever wanted to come back in that direction, I would have to have somebody sign me in. I would have to have an escort to even access everything that I've known for the last decade. And it was kind of a surreal moment for me. And then I got home. I had this mixed emotion of excitement because I was no longer in the military, fear because I was no longer in the military, anger because I just felt like there was just something missing, or I felt something was I left undone or unfinished. Like, I just remember thinking, like, I didn't even have a chance to say goodbye to any of my guys because while I was busy in that 30 days getting ready to leave the military, all of my guys and all of my friends and everybody that I knew was getting ready to basically redeploy. They were, some of them were receiving orders to get stationed somewhere else. Others were getting moved, within Fort Hood to another battalion. People were getting promoted, going to PLDC, going to BNOC. Like, everyone was just kind of going a gunshot blast, just 3 sheets to the wind, all different directions. And I just remember thinking, man, I didn't even have a chance to even really say goodbye to anybody. And got home, took off my uniform, kind of threw it on the bed like I normally do. And I just remember looking at the uniform thinking,
that's it.
Damn, that's the last time I'll probably never put that on again. And sure enough, I never did. It was such a weird feeling, man. A lot of mixed emotions.
So you had some leave, I imagine. So it wasn't like you still had like a month or two.
Yeah, I had some leave saved up because I was basically in Iraq for a whole year. Didn't really take any leave. Had a 2-week R&R, but that was it. So I had a 30-day pay cushion. That was it. Then after that, it was like.
And that was one of the things that it sort of happens in stages, right? Your final out, then your DD-214, then you take it off, and then 30 days later you wake up one morning and then you realize that I'm not even on leave anymore. Like, I am literally 100% irrevocably out of the military.
Yeah. And shortly after I ended up packing up my family and moved up here to New Hampshire. Well, what I didn't know was the military only paid for the distance from your home of record to your military installation. So, which is fine if you're moving back to your home of record. But unlike me, I wasn't moving back to my home of record. I was moving to New England, which is, a considerably further distance from where my home of record was from Fort Hood. And found out after the fact that if I had just changed my home of record, because I haven't been back to my home of record the entire time I was in the military, it really wasn't my home of record anymore. But I would have changed my home of record, I could have actually had been paid for the full travel distance to New England where I moved to, and I didn't know that. So I didn't even get the opportunity to get paid for the full move out of the military. About half the distance is what I got compensated for in whatever they pay you in mileage or whatever. But yeah, so ended up eating half the cost to move to New England after I got separated. So that was my first kind of like feeling of a little betrayal by the military, and because they knew all this, I didn't know that, and I felt a lot of their responsibility. Like, I felt that they had the responsibility to tell me these things and to inform me and to educate me I was very much not on the side of taking responsibility for my own actions, my own decisions, and my own separation. I very much kind of left it up to the military to to control the onus of my success. And I see that a lot with guys that get out that struggle, that find difficulty in separation. There's a lot of that, like, feeling of the military should have been more responsible for my post-military success. I felt that. It wasn't until many, many years later that I realized, I really owned that. Now, there was a lot of things that I'm sure the military could have done to help my transition, but by and large, that success post-military was really on me and up to me. And if anyone listening to this that's separated or is separating thinks or feels or believes in one way or another that the military should be ultimately responsible for their success post-military, I'm telling you, you're going to be sadly disappointed. You're going to end up becoming very bitter. I was actually very bitter towards the military for quite some time because, again, I felt that it was their responsibility more than it was mine to ensure that I had the tools. But then again, I looked at that massive packet that I got from the TAPS classes and all of that information. I began to think to myself, well, maybe this was their attempt at giving me that information and providing me with the support that I needed to be successful. But when I started to look to that information, I didn't understand most of it. And so then I started to feel like, okay, well, maybe they gave me the information, but they didn't provide me with the education and the tools necessary to decipher this information and actually put it into action where I could benefit from it. So then it was just in this constant cycle of my fault, their fault, my fault, their fault, my fault, their fault. And it wasn't until I finally just said, you know what, screw the military. I'm not going to blame them for anything anymore. I'm just going to stand on my own 2 feet. I'm going to be ultimately responsible for everything that happens in my life, good and bad, and take that ownership. And once I made that decision, I don't know what it was that triggered that, but once I finally just said, you know what, that's it. I own it, good and bad. It's my life. It's my whatever. And I'm going to, that's it. And then I just began to look at ways to improve my situation. Tried my hand at my own business. It failed. Didn't know what I was going to do. Did whatever I thought I could do. Became a corrections officer. And I said, you know what? I want more for my life. And I own it. This is my responsibility. I'm not going to blame anybody. Definitely not the military. And I was working second shift and asked my supervisor if I could move to first shift so I could take night classes and go to college and get a degree. And that's what I did. I just started to really take my own success into my own hands and just fight for what I wanted, and have been, I would say successful, not necessarily monetarily successful. I mean, I'm not rich by any means. But me and my family, we survive, and we're not hungry, and we pay the bills, and we get along with our lives. And I got a son that just graduated college recently, and found an incredible job. I got a daughter that's doing really well in school. I mean, I couldn't really ask for a whole lot more, and I think a lot of that really just comes down to taking that the ownership and that onus. And that responsibility. And that's really kind of ultimately why I started Change Your POV back in the day, was because I wanted to share my experiences with those that were transitioning in hopes that maybe I could, because, in the military, you have this, it's a train the trainer, right? You learn something, you pass it on to the next guy. You're Joe and you finally become a team chief, you pass that information off to your guy, then you become a squad leader and you pass that off to your team chiefs, you become a platoon sergeant, you pass that off to your squad leaders. I mean, it's all the way up the chain, right? It's the succession of command, and that's how the military has been so successful, is just that exchange of knowledge and information. You don't want the guy below you to have to learn all of those things the hard way. every single time. Now you're going to have a guy, you're going to learn things the hard way, but you don't want to have everyone in the military recreate the wheel, right? Because that's just not an efficient way to run anything. And so Change Your POV was really my ultimate way of trying to, pay that back and try to be a source of information to those that are transitioning to say, hey, I'm not going to be here and tell you that it's going to be roses and easy. It's going to be difficult and hard, and there's going to be a lot of things that you're going to fail at. But let me help you out on a few things that maybe you don't have to fail at so miserably. And that was really the goal of Change Your POV for the past 3 years. And I think, by and large, I think we're successful. Were we able to get into the hands of as many veterans as I would like? No, but I mean, I think that's everybody that's ever tried to help somebody. You want to be able to help more, right? And then introducing different concepts like mental health and camaraderie and military history, and just building a team of like-hearted individuals onto the Change Your POV network really helped it grow into more of a complete resource, I think. And so it's really, really good to see everyone's journey in that. And, we've had some kind of come along and help add to that catalog of knowledge and experience, and then left, and others have come on. And now it's, now you're starting your own show and your own RSS feed. And it's really exciting to see that journey. I mean, you've got a lot going on, and you're interviewing a lot of amazing guests, and you're, opening up the Pandora's box of veteran mental health. And I'll be honest with you, Dwayne, that if I hadn't have met you, I would not be as far along in my own mental health knowledge and journey as I am today, just in the amount of knowledge that I've been able to glean from you personally, and also from the guests that you have on, and the dialogue that you guys have on your shows every week.
Well, see, and you had that, what can, I guess, generally be considered a successful transition. It was rocky. I don't even want to say it was a little rocky, but you ran into some rough patches, and then, things smoothed out, and you figured out how to navigate the rough waters. I'll be honest with you, and when you were talking about sort of the ritual kind of stuff, I had that, right? Because I retired from the military, and I had my retirement ceremony. I had that, that ritual, that sort of, continuing. I had 18 months from when I decided to retire until we actually completed it. I had a couple months, leave. And so, and even then for me, it was, it seemed very short, but I walked out and I already had a job, and we still had our house, and, and I had a very atypical, smooth transition. And to hear you say that even with the successful transition that you've had, that there was still benefit to hear the mental health piece, that's the one aspect that we don't talk about when it comes to transition. And everybody inside the machine thinks they know what it's like outside the machine. You said that the person said, hey, make copies of your DD-214 because it's difficult. Well, it's not actually that difficult to get a copy of your DD-214. It's actually pretty easy now. But the person who gave it to you had always been told, it's impossible. It's like that your sergeant major trying to tell you, well, the job market out there is horrible, so you might as well just stay in. Well, he's never been in the job market. He doesn't know. Right? Yep. And so it's these issues of, once you're in the machine, you don't know what it's like outside the machine, but you give everybody advice about it. And I used to do the same thing. It's like, hey, Joe, high five, good luck. Here's $20. I hope you know where the bus station is, because I sure don't. And I turn back and I go into post and, go back to doing my job, right? And so once you're out of the military, sort of have this, holy crap, there's all these things that I needed to know that I didn't realize. And what you guys did with Change Your POV was trying to sort of put that mark and give that information back, so that it's the same thing like you said in the military. Is I'm just a little bit farther along than you, so I'm going to give some information and give some help. And you guys, when I was going through and I was transferring this over 578 separate episodes in 3 years. That's a lot, man.
Yeah,
it's huge.
It is, and it's funny because when we first started, I started out by myself doing solo shows, which really sucked, and found Bennett, and he came on, and we ultimately became, co-hosts together on the show, and we just covered, our initial goal was 50. Let's just get to 50 episodes and see what happens. And that's why when you first came on board, I was like, just give me 50 episodes, and then, you'll decide by then whether or not that it's going to be worthwhile to keep going, or if you kind of had enough fun and want to exit. But 50 episodes, I think, is kind of the earmark of any podcast to really have enough time in your, behind your belt to really know if it's something you want to keep doing or not. And so we got to our 50th episode, and it's one of my favorite episodes on the shows because I ended up doing a collage of different sound bites from the previous 50 shows, and it was just kind of a sampling of our journey in those 50 shows. And you look back on everything that we've created, and we've covered topics from, meditation to moral injury to resume building to, even an episode that we did that I really enjoyed was the concept of rituals growing up and converting from childhood to manhood, and different cultures and what different cultures do in these different rituals of transition from childhood to adulthood, and just exploring the different ideas and concepts and possibilities. And one of the things that the podcast taught me was to be open-minded about things that just because you don't know doesn't mean that it isn't real or doesn't happen, or just because you may have an opinion about something one way, it doesn't mean that that's the reality. And, you may have a belief about something, but it doesn't make it correct. And so it really forced me to and it challenged my own thoughts and perception about my own beliefs. And, one of the earlier things that we talked about that Bennett and I were kind of exploring before you came on board was this idea and concept of moral injury. And it's because we did a lot of shows on post-traumatic stress, and because that's really what, there were some things that I struggled with when I got out, and the only thing that I knew to describe it was PTS. But when I looked at and did more research on PTS, there were some things that I could relate to, but it really wasn't hitting the mark for me in terms of a lot of the things I was struggling with. But it wasn't until we started to look at and read articles about this weird thing called moral injury that it really started to click with me in the things that I was dealing with personally. And then you came on board and was able to kind of expand on that idea of moral injury and how different things within moral injury can really impact and affect your life. And I just became a student of that the mental health space. I mean, I wasn't taking seminars and becoming a student in the conventional sense, but just in the taking on and absorbing and listening to and reading different ideas and concepts around veteran mental health really opened my eyes to a lot of the challenges that I see with my buddies and friends, both those that are even still serving and those that have gotten out. And that's the thing. Like you talk about, these guys that don't know until they're, until the machine. They don't understand the machine. They don't understand the machine outside the military until they're out, right? I've had guys that I've reached out to, and I was like, hey man, you really need to start thinking about, developing your LinkedIn profile and start really looking at your network and start thinking about your life as it might look post-military. And a lot of these guys that are still in and that I really care about, they're my friends, my buddies, and they're just like, yeah, I don't see the need for that. I just don't understand. I got my DA photo, I've got my military profile, I'm good to go. And I'm like, that's good for when you're in the military, but when you get out, a lot of that information is really not that relevant. And people don't want to hear that their military experience isn't going to be as relevant as they might want it to be when they get out. And that's the reality of it. It just isn't as relevant as you might think. And it's funny because I just talked to one of my closest friends I served with almost the entire time I was in. And he stayed in after I got out and did quite a few more years than I did. But he's out now, and he's been working in a company as a welder and working on like the welding robots. So he kind of manages and maintains these welding robots, but he understands welding, and he's really, really good at what he does. He was a platoon sergeant. He worked at one point as the battalion non-commissioned officer for the field artillery battalion. Like, really smart guy. Knows how to lead. Is a true leader. True mentor type of leader. He leads by example and is not, won't do anything unless he's either done it himself or not willing to do it himself. That he's just that kind of guy, real down to earth. And so his supervisors at this plant approached him and we're kind of feeling him out to see if he wants to take on like these, supervisor or management type roles. And he's like, well, I can manage this, I can manage that. And they're like, well, you don't really have any experience. And he goes, dude, that's just what I, did for, 15 years in the Army. And they're like, and they looked at him and said, yeah, but leading in the military is different. And, or I think they said managing in the military is different than managing here. And he and I were talking about what a lot of people think that being a manager or supervisor in the military means. Like, a lot of people that don't know or understand thinks that all we did every day was go to the range and shoot targets, right? And just play with weapons all day long. And, nobody really understands the full spectrum of roles and responsibilities and experiences that you have in the military with administrative tasks and with, managing people and managing schedules and projects. And the list of things that we do in the military, especially the further up the ranks you go, is very transferable to the same types of experiences you would have or need in the civilian sector to be a successful supervisor or manager, etc. And we just kind of chuckled about it because he and I, like, it's like, we're on the inside, like we have the inside joke, like we're laughing about it. But the reality is so many non-military folks, we'll call them civilians or non-veterans, whatever you want to call them, unless they're educated, they don't really fully understand the value that a veteran can bring to their organization. And again, that's another thing that Change Your POV was trying to do. You're trying to break down the stigma of veteran mental health. I'm trying to break down the stigma of all veterans only, go to work every day and just shoot guns. Like, there's a lot of transferable skills that we have that we can bring to bear into the corporate world. And it's just educating those veterans to be able to articulate what those things are. And that's one of the things that I help veterans do. And that's kind of my passion, the passion you have for veteran mental health, I have for educating veterans to be successful in the corporate environment. Bennett's passion is very much around entrepreneurial type endeavors. Like, he really, really has a heart for, small business ownership, nonprofit organizations, and just that whole entrepreneurial spirit. So you just get this collection of guys on the network that have different passions about different things, and the willingness and desire to help a fellow brother out. And I think is kind of the secret sauce that Change Your POV has brought to the table for the last 3 years.
Well, yeah, no, I mean, and there has by whatever measure of success, and you were talking about, it didn't make us rich or anything, but over 131,000 downloads, right? That's nothing to sneeze at. Is that over 131,000 times someone listened to something that you guys had to say. This idea of people who have never been in the military, who have that idea, again, this is the idea of those who are outside the machine and had never been in the machine, doesn't know what it looks like on the inside. I had a similar experience after I finished my master's in clinical mental health. I still had some GI Bill left, and so I went back to get my MBA, and I was talking to the head of the MBA program there at my university, and she said the same thing, and I said, yeah, I was in the Army for 22 years, and I, explained to her what a platoon sergeant was and a first sergeant was and all that. And she was like, well, you're going to learn a lot in this program because leading in business is a lot different than leading in the military. And I nodded and smiled, and as I went through the MBA, I was like, leading is a lot like leading anywhere else, right? It's this, and I was able to, especially with my classmates or whatever, but I was able to draw a lot of parallels between the challenges and the things that I did, that we overcame in the military to those same things. And so it's very, it's interesting. And that's where I think, and definitely I saw Change Your POV as bridging that gap, not just informing the veterans or the military family members, but also informing those that were going to be working with veterans. And that's one of the goals of my show that was within the Change Your POV is, if you're going to be working with the veteran, you have to understand what it's like, right? They have to listen to your transition story to hear what it's like and even what the challenges of transition are. But again, and you guys said that, or you said it earlier, that you guys didn't just look at resume stuff. You didn't just look at, the standard, how do you interview? Because there's all kind of, things like that going on. I think that show about moral injury was probably the first. That's how I found you, was the show on moral injury. And I'd listen to it, and not in a cynical way of, let me troubleshoot these guys. But I was like, after listening to it, I was like, these guys got it. I mean, they're pretty on target with this, right? I mean, you, as a grasping of not having any clinical training in it, I think you had, it wasn't just you and Bennett. You had somebody else on the show, Tim, I think it was. That the three of you were talking about moral injury and you'd done your research. And I think that's when I had reached out to you, and I'd already been writing for a year. And I think that I had just said, hey, let me come on your show and talk about what you guys got right, kind of thing. And I think that's pretty much how I got connected to you.
Yeah. I think it was. And it was one of those things where, we weren't afraid to stretch the limits of our own personal knowledge about ideas and concepts. Neither one, I mean, Bennett was probably the closest expert we had in the veteran mental health space, being working for the VA, doing, peer mentorship type of activities. But at the same time, very limited exposure to any actual training in that area. But at the same time, it's like, these are the things that veterans are talking about amongst themselves all the time anyway, whether they're talking about them with a veteran mental health specialist or clinician or otherwise. Guys are talking about their experiences. They may not realize that what they're doing is touching different mental health concepts, but they're talking about it nonetheless, right? And that's one of the things that I found and continue to find, I guess, most beneficial is talking to guys that I don't necessarily have to serve with them, but guys that have served, that I can be able to have a conversation about my time in the military and my time, on deployment, and feel like it's a safe place to talk and it's okay to discuss certain things, because there are things that happened or that has happened or does happen in wartime that, to anyone that was never there or has never experienced it, would look at it and be like, that's wrong. That's really messed up. Like, how could you do that? Or how could you be a part of that, or be privy to that, or how could you be okay with that? And it's like, it's those conversations that you have that you're able to open up and not be judged by things that have happened in your deployment or in your experience. And that was just, it's a place of, I don't know, maybe call it a safe place, I guess, for the lack of a better term, but being able to just open up and talk with guys that have been there, done that, has helped me through my journey, post military, in my transition, because when I moved away from Fort Hood to New England, there's really no military infrastructure up here at all. There's no military base close by. There's no real large military or veteran organizations. I mean, you've got your typical, American Legion and your VFWs. Aside from that, there's really not a whole lot up here, right? And so
if World War III kicks off, you and Bennett are in charge of the brigade, right?
Yeah.
You guys,
yeah,
round them up, boys.
Let's do this. Yeah, it was just, I lost connection to the military ethos, I think, and it was hard for me to be separated from the military and be away from that that team atmosphere, I think, or that, whatever you want to call it, right? Being a part of, a larger group, or a larger meaning, a loss of purpose, I think, is the big thing that I felt, because the military was very much my world, my identity, and was who I was, right? I was Sergeant Lazzari, and Sergeant Lazzari was me. And to take off that uniform and remove those stripes and no longer be that Sergeant Lazzari, I lost my identity, or at least I lost who I was able to connect my identity with, and I didn't have anything else to fall back on. I mean, take away my military experience, all I was a high school, barely graduated high school, graduate, and that was it. And I didn't know what to do about that. I didn't know how to feel about that. I was a senior squad leader, acting platoon sergeant at times, and I was able to command and control the flow of my world, and command and control the respect of those around me, both seniors, peers, and subordinates. And it was, I was very, very good at my job, and felt that was me. That was who I was. That was my identity. And then when I got out, I lost all that. And so I didn't know where I would find that again, or how I would do that again. I'd have to reinvent myself. And I did, but ultimately it did. But it took a lot of trial and error, and a lot of guys that I talk to deal with that same very thing. And in a lot of cases, they don't ever find a way to reinvent themselves. And I think a lot of it comes down to finding purpose again. And that was another reason I started Change Your POV, was initially it was to kind of do that train the trainer thing, kind of pass the torch on. But selfishly, if I'm being honest, it was I had to create a sense of purpose for myself again. That serving something bigger than yourself really means a lot to me, and I found that in the military, and when I got out, I lost that. So I had to find that again, and I tried to find it in different organizations, but like I said, there just wasn't any here. So I just decided, well, if I can't find it, I'm going to create it. And so Change Your POV was my way of creating that sense of purpose, and that sense of being part of something bigger than myself, serving a greater cause. And that gave me a lot of comfort in knowing that I was making a difference, or at least trying to make a difference, and being a part of something bigger than me. And that's also our message to guys and gals listening, to the show was, if you can't be a part of something, you need to find a way to get plugged back in, to get connected with something bigger than yourself. You need to find purpose again, and it comes in different forms for different people. I mean, volunteering at your local animal shelter might be what that is for you, right? That might be all you need, a few hours every Saturday to go in and help clean out kennels and feed, puppies, and boom, you feel like you are giving back and you're a part of something bigger than yourself. Some people, they need to start their own, how many veterans get out of the military and they are just hell bent on starting their own nonprofit organization. And we
or t-shirt or coffee
or
business,
a t-shirt or coffee company, right? And we kind of poke at it and we kind of laugh at it a little bit and we think it's kind of funny. But I guarantee you that most of those folks are doing it just because they're trying to. Now, no one's going to get rich doing. I mean, there's a few companies out there that are finding monetary success in those companies, but by and large, a lot of what these guys are trying to do is they're trying to create something bigger than themselves. They're trying to create purpose and meaning in their life, and there's nothing wrong with that. However, it doesn't matter what you do. You got to find purpose and meaning in your life. And if you try something like that to bring purpose and meaning in your life and it doesn't succeed, then you also have to be okay with some level of failure as well, right? And some guys, they start something because they want to have something meaningful and purposeful in their life, and then it miserably fails. And now they're left with, okay, now not only do I not have something that I can have in my life that brings me purpose and meaning, but now I'm also a failure on top of it. And I experienced some of that when I failed with my own business, that sense of I never failed anything in my life before, but now here I am, a failed business owner, right? And I took that personally. I took that to heart, and I didn't want that to be my new identity, right? A failed business owner. And I grappled with a lot, man, a lot of inside, scrapplings with myself, right? A lot of interior mental arguments or conflict. And it's a lot, man, because sometimes I am my own worst critic. I am my own worst enemy. I make perfect the enemy of good. Some might even say I'm a little obsessive compulsive when it comes to certain things. I start a lot of things and I never finish them. I never see them through. I mean, there's a lot of things about myself that I've learned in this process. And that's the other thing that we talk about on the show quite a bit was self-actualization. Understanding and becoming aware of oneself it's a journey, man, and it's not easy. And but I think it's necessary to understand more about oneself, and good and bad, and to recognize your faults and to have people in your life that are able and willing to give it to you straight, and you've got to be open to it. And having you and Jeff and Bennett and Andrew is kind of on my. I consider you guys to be on my board. You are on my board of directors in my life, and I am open to hear the different constructive criticisms that you guys have, because I know that it comes from a place of love, and to have that is invaluable. So anybody that is separating from the military, I think that's another key piece of being successful, is developing your own board of directors, people that you have on your team, on your side, that are willing to look out for your best interests and be honest and candid with you, even if it's things that are hard to hear.
Well, and I think that's one of the things, again, you personally, and then the Change Your POV podcast. I was actually talking to somebody yesterday who was saying, I'm thinking of starting my own podcast, but it's too difficult, right? It's too hard. It's too, and you grabbed the mic and you got started, and Bennett, came on and said, dude, that kind of sucks, and let me come on and have conversations with you and make it better than what it was. And you have amassed a body of work that is pretty significant, and you've had some very memorable moments. Your 040404 series, I think, was probably one of the highlights for me that the Change Your POV did. But then also saying, this isn't just about you, that you brought on the other shows, and you said that, I know what my limits are, and I can't do this all myself, and you and Bennett together. But then sharing that knowledge, right? This is this is kicking off. This is spinning off. Essentially, I'm a spin-off of the Change Your POV podcast. Conspiracy Geeks can be considered a spin-off of the Change Your POV podcast network. Hopefully I'll be, if we're a spin-off of Happy Days, I'll be like Laverne and Shirley and not Joni Loves Chachi, right?
Right,
so it'll be a successful spin-off as opposed to this, the original show was good, but the second one was crap. But being able to, this isn't difficult, right? I mean, it's something that you can learn. And we veterans aren't necessarily communicating in this way. I know that we as mental health professionals aren't communicating this way. But you're absolutely right. That connection that you have to other people is what is going to make us successful in post-military life. If it wasn't for, you and your harebrained scheme of, I think I originally said no, didn't I? I said, forget that.
Yeah, I think you I don't know if it was a straight up no, but it was definitely an apprehensive, like, I'm going to have to think about that. And I'll get back to you on that. But it didn't say, I was like, okay, man, well, wrestle around with it for a little while and let me know what you think. And you finally kind of came back around and said, yeah, I think I might want to try this. And I knew you were going to be good at it. I mean, if you could talk and interview half as good as you can write your articles, I'm like, this is a no-brainer. You're going to tap into because that's the thing too, is I've done a lot of research to say, okay, well, what are other, anytime you're doing anything, whether it's small business, a podcast, whatever, you're always curious about who's out there doing what you're doing. And I guess competition is not the right word in the podcast space, but I became acutely aware of other people, other veterans that were creating podcasts, and I listened to a lot of them because I wanted to see what is it that they were talking about. Is it the same, similar, or different than what I was talking about? Not that I thought we were in competition, but I wanted to make sure that I wasn't just another show talking about the same things over and over again. I wanted to be uniquely different. And to be honest with you, there's a lot of veteran podcasts out there that talk about separation and transition and things like that. But a lot of the topics, some are similar. You start getting into broad topics like PTSD and, converting military experience, those type of things. Those are very broad topics. But I think that what we were able to bring to the table was a lot more granular in terms of really digging into some of those topics and getting really to the heart of some of the actionable steps that one would need to take to see success in some of those areas. And, being able to bring you on and it's funny because, Change Your POV Podcast Network, it was one of those shows that I would subscribe to my own show and it would download all of the episodes that we're releasing because I had the joy of driving into work every morning, listening to a new release of a show that I didn't have an advanced copy of. So when I would listen to one of your new releases, it was at the same time everyone else in the world was also listening to it. And some of them, all your shows are good, but some of them really hit me harder than others personally. And I just, a few times pulled into the parking lot of my work and kind of sat and finished listening to the show. And a couple times even called you, even though we had this time difference and I'd wake you up at dark stupid in the morning, but call you to tell you about the show that you had released and how it personally impacted me. And it was I just remember thinking, wow, how lucky I was to be able to capture those interviews and those moments on the Change Your POV Podcast Network. And regardless of what happens going forward, whether you're doing your own show on your own network or, having shows on Change Your POV, regardless, it's content that will be out there in the ecosphere forever, right? It's timeless. I think it's evergreen. I don't think there's any show that we've done, that wouldn't be relevant 10, 15, 20 years from now. And that's one of the things that I really enjoyed about creating the show is knowing that, at some point down the road, I'm going to be an old man and maybe my grandkids will have the opportunity to listen to some of my shows and listen to, depending on how old they are, some shows might be inappropriate, but nonetheless, it's building a library of legacy, I think, right? When we're long gone, Dwayne, you and I, and we've passed the ultimate baton on to those in our lives that are coming after us. Those episodes and our voices will be, heard long after we're gone. And I think building that legacy, and I didn't realize that's ultimately what we were doing until, much, much later in, probably 2.5 years into it. I'm like, wow, we're not only building a library of a lot of content here, but we're building our legacy in things that will carry on after we're long gone, right? And I think ultimately that's what we all strive to do, is to have a big enough impact in other people's lives to be a positive force in people's lives long after we've gone, right? And I think if we can say we've done that, or at least we've tried to do that, to pass it forward, or whatever you want to call it, then I think that's being successful in your endeavors, right? Whatever it is, if you are finding a way to make a lasting change for the positive in anyone's life, I think that's all anyone could ask.
And that's sort of that long view. It's very critical. I've been doing a lot with voice first technology and doing this thing with the Alexa, Amazon Alexa, and there's this concept. There's a sort of voice first futurist guy named Brian Romley, who really, the future of AI is that there will be a point in the future in which everything that we are, our personality, what we know, is going to be captured. So imagine, if tragedy strikes and I pass away before my son marries, and then on the day before his wedding day or something, he pulls up whatever this archive of my personality is and say, what, Dad, I'm really, it's not me, right? It's recorded me, or it's just, it's captured me. And he was like, hey, I'm not really sure about this, or I'm really nervous about this. And what did you think on your wedding day? And then that's able to be played back. Well, I'm thinking about your great grandchildren who are thinking about starting their own business, can go back and listen to that episode where you talk about your business failure, and how not to tear down a tree, right? Or
Yeah,
what is it, Bennett and his blue chickens, or it's a but some of this if there is like, hey, I wonder what great grandpa Lazzari thought about this subject, that it's always there.
yeah. And and here's the funny thing too, and this is something that I haven't really shared with anyone. And this is really for anyone that's ever thought about or interested in starting a podcast. A lot of questions that I get around podcast is, what benefit do you get out of podcasting? And traditionally, I've always said, like, what we're talking about is building a library of content. Promoting oneself. There's a lot of advantages to, and when I say promoting yourself, I'm not talking about in a egotistical kind of a snobbish way, but branding, creating your own brand, marketing yourself in a positive light is incredibly valuable today, and will probably be even more valuable in the future. And a podcast is one way of doing that. Blogging is another way. There's a lot of different ways you can do that, and I found podcasting to be more of an avenue that I could continue to do versus writing. I like writing, but I don't have the bandwidth to sit down and craft a written word like you do, Dwayne, in your blog articles. I just find them a little bit more difficult for me to do. But podcasting is more of the medium that's more my speed. And so one of the other things, though, that and this, again, to anyone that's ever thought about starting a podcast, are these intangible experiences, intangible lessons, or whatever you want to call it, that you end up learning in the process. And here's a short list of some things that I ended up gaining value from podcasting. And that is, I work in a corporate environment. That's my day job. I work for a large organization and in the corporate world, and I find it much easier than a lot of people to present in front of a large group. I find it easier than a lot of people to articulate an idea or a thought without using a lot of filler words like ums and ahs and so's. But that hasn't always been the case. I have struggled with, vocalized interpretations of thought, especially in a large group. Giving presentations wasn't always easy for me. Yeah, I've given classes in the military. I was a range officer. I mean, there's a lot of things that you do in the military, but you're not standing up in front of a whole bunch of people with a PowerPoint presentation trying to convey an idea or thought. In the corporate world, you do, and a lot of people approach me and say, "Wow, you really know how to control a room. You really know how to present. You know how to articulate. You know how to interview." I've done a lot of interviews, and people say, "Well, where do you learn that? Where did you learn that?" And to be honest with you, Dwayne, I think a lot of my success in the corporate world with verbal communication and everything that implies, from presentation to interviewing, etc., really comes down to the many, many, many hours that I've spent behind the microphone doing podcasting, interviewing people. I'm sure you're starting to see a little bit of a difference in the way you listen to people. Well, I mean, you're a mental health clinician, so you're trained in listening. But when you're interviewing somebody, you learn over time how to anticipate what they're thinking or the direction that the conversation is going to go. And you have an agenda, I guess, for lack of a better term, you have an agenda that you're trying to hit during that interview. And so you've got to try to guide and direct or steer that conversation back onto topic. And, those are skills that I learned through interviewing and podcasting through Change Your POV. And it was one of those things that I would have never have guessed or never have known when I first started out that would be one of the residual benefits of podcasting. And it's a tremendous skill set that I learned as a result, and I'm very happy that I did. So for anybody that's interested in podcasting or thinking about doing it, and they're wondering what is in it for them, aside from, having a medium by which you can voice an idea or thought, aside from building legacy for the future, aside from all those things we talked about before, there's a lot of intangibles as well that you'll end up learning that you gained throughout the process.
And I think that's one of the biggest things is, you're podcasting for the audience, but you're also podcasting for yourself, right? There's a little bit of a selfishness that maybe goes along with it, in that you get to have really cool conversations with really cool people, right? There's people that I normally would not have, when I interviewed General Don Bolduc, right? I'm not necessarily going to be able to have a conversation with them, but he and I, since when are you going to talk about the difficult transition of a general officer with a one-star former, SOCAF commander? These are the kind of cool, intangible things that happen whenever you're trying to do a podcast. I actually just had something happen just the other day with this. So I wrote a blog post. It's been over a year now. About when I visited the Marine Corps Memorial Hotel, right? Actually, I was in San Francisco. I had met Justine Evers for coffee. Number one, another connection of somebody that I met through blogging that then I introduced you to Justine. I think she actually came on Change Your POV a couple of different times.
Yep.
And then Justine was like, "Hey, you've got to go check out this." I said, where's good for dinner? She said, go eat at the Marine Corps Memorial Hotel. Well, if you've never been there, down in the lobby, there's all of these displays, and there's actually a display about a Marine Corps Second Lieutenant J.P. Blecksmith, who was killed in action, and he had a disposable camera. You know how we used to carry those disposable cameras around with that combat tourist. And there's this story about how one of the multimedia folks in the Marine Corps had developed this, and it was like probably the last known thing that he saw. The last thing that he saw was this this image on the rooftop, and it was just this really meaningful thing for me. And I saw, well, that means something different to me. That story means something different to me. As a veteran, means something different to you as a veteran, somebody who served in combat, than somebody who didn't. So I wrote that. Then a little bit later, I had a Navy veteran on the show, Tim Avery, back in episode 56. Again, Justin Nasiri, who actually sort of got me started in podcast with his Beyond the Uniform, introduced me to Tim, and then Tim was on the show in episode 56. That blog post made it into the book. I gave Tim a copy of my book. Well, I just got a message from Tim. He was like, "Hey, I'm reading through your book. I was actually in class at the Naval Academy with J.P. Blecksmith. We knew each other."
Wow.
And it's this thing that comes full circle that had I not met Justine through our mutual writings and then had coffee with her and gone to the Marine Corps Memorial Hotel and then had that dinner and then all of these other things, and if Justin hadn't introduced me to Tim, and then that one moment where Tim had a connection of, I knew that guy, and I'm able to remember him in a certain way, and thank you for that, is really what his message was. I mean, that makes it all worth it, right? I mean, no matter what else is going on, just that connection right there is, and we always say, oh, if I can only help one individual, but I think that's the kind of intangible stuff that happens when we put ourselves out there and we create this content and we start drawing all these different lines between the dots. That's where the magic happens. Yeah,
absolutely. And networking, and I can't say it enough, networking has been such an incredible part of my success post-military, both within the military community as well as in my corporate environment, because I realized that it's a funny thing, right? The whole time I was in the military, I knew that there's no way you can do something by yourself. I mean, that's the whole reason why, teams are created. I mean, you got battle buddies. There is no individual. The lowest element is two, right? You and your battle buddy. And the more you bring onto that equation, your teams, your squads, your platoons, the more and more things you're able to do and accomplish, all the way up to securing the objective, right? Ultimately, whatever that is. And everyone in the military knows that you just don't do anything successfully by yourself. You are an individual member of a cog of a giant wheel, but you're not irreplaceable, right? You've got succession of command in your build. You build that into your structure, your hierarchy. My Joes are trained to do my job. I'm trained to do my platoon sergeant's job, all the way up the chain of command, right? That's just the way it works.
Were you surprised that the Army kept going when you left Fort Hood? Like the flag went up and the flag went down, and
right? Exactly. It just the Army goes rolling along, like that song means something now, right? Because it truly does keep going. And I get out of the military and I try to do everything myself. I try to do everything myself and completely failed time and time again. And it finally hits me. I'm like, nothing I did in the military I was able to do successfully myself. You could try, but you're not going to have a whole lot of success being an individual in the military. Embracing, team. There's no I in team, right? Some people will say, well, what about the Army of One, right? And the whole slogan. I don't even know if that's still the Army slogan, but it was
definitely not.
It was when I was in, right? Yeah. The Army of One. It was a big joke, but the reality is nobody did anything alone in the military and had a whole lot of great success from it. You get out of the military, and I, for some reason, thought that I was good enough to do everything myself. And I realized that very quickly that attempting to do that brought nothing but a whole lot of failure and misery. And so I decided that I would go back to incorporating what I learned in the military, and that was you need You need people. You need people on your team, on your side to help you out. You need to build that network. And that's what once I finally decided to just give in and open myself up to that, and ask for help and ask for, help can be a lot of different things. For me, I just needed somebody that understood kind of where I came from, an ear to talk to, somebody to share ideas and bounce thoughts off of, hey man, I got this crazy idea. Am I crazy? Here's what it is. And then the response, whatever that is, and be open to that response. Something as simple as that. Just realizing that you can't make decisions in your life by yourself. And network became incredibly important to me. And I started to build it out on LinkedIn and on other social medias, and began to grow my network. And now I got friends I consider to be close friends whom I've never even met before. I've never met Jeff in person. You and I only met once, a few months back in Florida for the first time. Met Bennett a handful of times. Literally can count on one hand how many times I've, been in the same room with him. But it made me realize that connections can span the globe. They don't have to be right next door or in your hometown. Like some of the closest friends or confidants that I have in my network live all over the country, Justine Evers being one of them, wherever she happens to reside these days. I know she's been moving around a lot, but it's just amazing to have incredible people in your life. And so that's one of my advice to anyone out there. When you separate from the military, think outside your local community, think outside your hometown, think outside, whatever it is. Open yourself up to being open to new things. There's people that I would have never even imagined having friends that were not in the Army, right? I got friends that were in the Navy, that were in the Marine Corps, and that live all over the country, and people that I really value in my life. And it starts with me being putting myself out there, as you said, right? Being willing to put yourself out there and be willing to make friends and introduce yourself. And I think podcasting more than anything allowed me to start that conversation, right? Like I would have never met Sylvia, and I would have never have met, so many people. I can just go on forever of the people that I have an opportunity to talk to and interview. Then I now consider to be part of my extended family, and I think it's just an amazing thing that, whether Change Your POV continues going forward or not, it doesn't change the relationships that I've been able to build along the way.
And that's definitely what you've done, right? Bringing us all together and building just the network. It's unique. The idea that you guys had was different shows on the same stream is unique. Of course, it took a little explaining to when people said they wanted to figure this out. How do I get your show? But it's good the way that you guys had it set up, and I appreciate it. And we got to bring this to a close.
Yeah, man, it's great talking to you, and best of luck with all of your endeavors moving forward, transitioning your Headspace and Timing podcast over to your own solid show. I think it's exciting. I think, man, I'm here for anything that you need, and I'm just I'm grateful that you were able to play along on the Change Your POV podcast network for as long as you have, and I'm encouraged that you're deciding to continue and to move forward. I think it's awesome, man. I'm really, really excited for you.
No, I appreciate it. And you guys get, sort of cameos anytime you want to come back on, right? That's sort of the, it's even whether I want to or not, you'll be like, hey, we're going to talk today. And like, all right.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it's so this is going to be the first episode on the new stream. It's January 1st. It's and it's like everything happened the way it's supposed to, because January 1st lands on a Tuesday. And that's, I'm still going to maintain that. It's still going to be out on Tuesday mornings. But you're going to be able to find it on all the spaces, Spotify, iTunes, Google Play, TuneIn. I got a whole list of Stitcher. I'm in the process. So as you're listening to this, or anybody's listening to this, it's on your own. And then I got to build it up again, right? I got to Should I give away books for the first number of people who review or something? Should I do something like that?
Yeah, I think so. That would be a great idea, because you got to get those reviews up on your RSS feed, right? That'd be a great idea for anyone that reviews. And again, we're not saying anyone that gives you a 5-star, just anyone that provides you with a review, an honest rating and review, gets thrown into a drawing at the end of January for a free, the veteran. Jesus, I just butchered your name of your book. I got it sitting right here, as a matter of fact. It's a great book. Are you going to do a sequel, a second one?
It's actually, we're in the process of putting the first one out as we should have planned this out, right? So the first one, the prequel is actually going to be the sequel. And so by the end of January, the first one, titled Headspace and Timing, is going to come out in paperback.
Nice.
But it's going to come out as the second book.
It's only on ebook right now?
It's on Kindle right now. And
okay.
And so we're doing that. I may even do one better. I may put my where my money where my mouth is and say anybody that either the first 20, let's say the first 20 to subscribe or to leave a review, if they email it to me and they give me, take a snapshot, take a screenshot of their review and email it to me at Dwayne@veteranmentalhealth.com, and then their address, and I'll send them a book. Like 20.
That's very cool.
I'm giving away 20.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
20.
I'm not rich.
No.
I can't do the first 50 or the first 100.
Right. You will eventually, though. No, but that's a great idea. That's very, very cool. You got to build up that. You got to get those listeners to subscribe. That's one of the hard challenges, is to get people that have already subscribed on Change Your POV to go over and find your show and subscribe on your show. But the name of the show that they're looking for is Headspace and Timing, right?
That's
not changed.
Nope.
So there you go.
So you'll be able to find it in your podcast player of choice. Well, there you
That's
go,
cool,
buddy.
Man.
No, I appreciate you taking the time out. And like I said, this is not the end. This is it's like the end of Casablanca, right? This is the beginning of a beautiful friendship.
And so, just so everyone is listening, you're migrating all of the Headspace and Timing shows that was on Change Your POV over to so they can get everything over on one feed, right?
Yeah, all the way back.
Oh,
your episode
nice.
89, and it's going to be fully populated all the way back to the first show.
Wow, very cool.
So all of the shenanigans and messing arounds, it's all going to be there.
Very cool. Awesome. Looking forward to it.
All right, brother. Well, now I will tell you, if you're one of the first 20, you're not going to be able to. I'm not giving you another book. You've already got one.
Nice.
All right, man. Take it easy, and we'll catch you later.
All right, man.
You're listening to Headspace and Timing, where we're trying to change the way that we think and talk about veteran mental health. This episode did run on a bit longer than usual, which is kind of saying something. Like you heard on the show, Eddie and I have been working together for a couple of years. He and his co-host, Bennett, created the Change Your POV Podcast Network to be the most comprehensive resource for service members and veterans as they transition. They saw, as I do, that there's not a lot of discussion about mental health and wellness as we leave the military. We always say that the military trains us to be service members, but they don't train us how not to be service members. Serving in the military has an impact on the way that we think and the way that we behave. That's not a bad thing, and it's often a good thing. It doesn't mean that we're crazy combat killers or broken warriors or mythic heroes. It does mean that we need to understand how our experience changed us and how we can have the best post-military life we deserve. I owe a huge debt of gratitude to Eddie and Bennett, as well as fellow co-hosts Jeff Adamek and Andrew McDowell. Their support and willingness to have hard conversations about mental health and wellness is encouraging. Thanks for taking the time to check us out. If you want to find the show notes for this episode, go to veteranmentalhealth.com/089. While you're there, share the link to the show with someone that you think may enjoy it. One of the challenges in changing the way we think and talk about mental health is spreading the word. You can subscribe to a bunch of different podcast players like iTunes, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, and many others. Check them out at veteranmentalhealth.com/platforms. Don't forget to write a review. Like I said in the episode, the first 20 folks that subscribe or write a review, take a picture of it and email it to me at Dwayne@veteranmentalhealth.com. I'll send you a free autographed copy of Combat Vet Don't Mean Crazy. I'd like to thank Doc Todd for giving us permission to use his track Not Alone from his album Combat Medicine. Doc is trying to bring the discussion about veteran mental health out of the darkness and into the light, and you can see all of his work at therealdoctodd.com. Make sure to join us next week for another great episode, and until then, remember, veterans, you're not alone, ever.
The struggle is real, found a feast and lost a soul. Eventually my drinking, it got out of control. There in darkness I roam, struggling to find home. See, suddenly death didn't feel so alone. 22 a day, destination unknown. It could have been avoided if you picked up the phone, but now you're gone, so I guess all we get is the tone. Nothing but bone weeds, overgrown, pushing up stones. I've triumphed over enemies, co-created enemies. Broke out facilities that tried to put an end to me. R.I.P. I'd rather grind in tranquility. Authentic Tennessee, embrace my ability.
I try so hard to have faith. I bow my head and I pray. Lord, please lend me the strength to carry on and keep standing. How this life's so demanding, so much pain, all this planning. I heard each time my way, but with you I'm not alone.
You're not alone.
Ah, yeah. And every time that I fall, I'ma call on you, get myself back up again.
Without my Georgia girls, yeah, I'd probably be dead. Cause I'd be taking every med that the VA said. Gave every shred, every last thread of my identity. Conquer my fragility, eliminate the enemy. Deliver me, God, from temptation. Tell me that this life is just a matrix. Need a facelift, back to basics. Vision Lasix, I only feel alive when I hear the bass kick.
Oh, I try so hard to have faith. I bow my head and I pray. Lord, please lend me the strength to carry on and keep standing.
Stand up.
How this life's so demanding, so much pain, all this planning. I heard each time my way, but with you I'm not alone.
Not alone. Yeah. You're not alone.
Ah, yeah. And every time that I fall, I'ma call on you, pick myself back up again.
Yeah, just pick up the phone, you're not alone. Just pick up the phone, you're not alone, man. Just pick up the phone, you're not alone. Yeah, pick up the phone, I'm right here. And I love you guys. Take those bottles out, dog, and pour them in the sink. Take the needles out your arm and the gun away from your forehead. It's time, man, you've been through enough pain, stand up. It's time to stand back up. All my veterans, man, Army, Marine Corps, Navy, Air Force, Coast Guard. Get up, you know.
Oh, I try so hard to have faith. I bow my head and I pray.